Welcome to our inaugural Ideas Social Innovation Lab webinar. My name is Dan Samosh. I'm with the Employment Relations Studies Department at Queen's University, and I'm also part of the IDEA team. I want to note that captions should be available for this webinar, but as we go along, if you have any questions or concerns relating to accessibility or otherwise, please let us know either probably through the Q&A function or possibly by email or otherwise. And just want to note as well that this is our first webinar, so we're keen to grow and get better. Later on, I'll talk to you about a feedback mechanism that we have to make sure that we are growing in this process. Given that this is our first inaugural webinar, I'm going to give some background on IDEA itself, on the webinar series, on how today's webinar will operate, and then introduce our two speakers. So to begin, IDEA is a social innovation laboratory. IDEA stands for Inclusive Design for Employment Access. Our goal broadly as an organization is to create stronger and more inclusive labor markets that include persons with disabilities. And a big part of this is developing evidence-informed tools and resources through co-design with partners to help advance employer capacity to be inclusive. And that's across the employment cycle, from recruitment to hiring, onboarding, retention, mentorship, promotion, and also things like organizational exit. So this initiative is spearheaded by teams of researchers, community leaders, global experts, industry leaders, policymakers, and many others. And many of us involved in the IDEA team also identify with disability in one form or another, kind of in keeping with the concept of nothing about us without us. So this webinar is a part of a speaker series, and it serves as an opportunity to learn about current topics, both within IDEA, but also well beyond, because there's amazing work going on all across the world, and we want to showcase that. And a big part of the series is to be practical. So for the practitioners who are joining us, the policymakers, the employers, service providers, one of our aims here is to share information, solutions-focused ideas, strategies, policies, and so on that you can hopefully bring to where you work. Our guest speakers will include a broad range of individuals, from researchers like today, but also community leaders, experts, people in industry, policy, and so on. So if you do have a suggestion about who you might want to have speak within this webinar series, please let us know. Probably the easiest way is to email us, and that's at info@vraie-idea.ca, vraie-idea.ca. So we plan to also run these webinars monthly, beginning in the new year after this one on the last Friday of each month. If you're interested in taking part, we have a newsletter. You can also email us, and we'll make sure that you're aware of when these are running and who's taking part. And we're also going to be recording webinars and posting them online on the IDEA website. So if you miss one, there's an opportunity to still review it and be a part of it in that way. Turning to the structure of this webinar, I'll introduce our speakers, then we'll get into the presentation, followed by a Q&A. Our hope is to have more time for Q&A, so likely the presentations in general will run between 20 to 25 minutes. The webinar itself is 1 hour total, between noon to 1 p.m. In general, I'll be talking less too. This is just as the first one, talking a little bit more. And for Q&A, I'll comment on this again later, but the way to interact is primarily through the Q&A function on Zoom, which is at the bottom of the screen. There's a box that should pop up that allows you to type in, and we will monitor and share that information with the presenters as we go. And last again, as I mentioned, we'll have a feedback mechanism at the end of this webinar. You should receive a pop-up for a short survey about your experience in the webinar, accessibility of the webinar, and so on. If you can fill that out, it would be great. If you want, you can also email us too. There are lots of ways to get in touch. So turning to our presentation today, we have two speakers, Emile Tompa, who is the executive director of IDEA, and Rebecca Gewurtz, the director of IDEA. So Dr. Tompa is a senior scientist at the Institute for Work and Health, as well as an associate professor in the Department of Economics at McMaster, and an assistant professor in the Lana School of Public Health at U of T. Dr. Gewurtz is an occupational therapist, an associate professor in the School of Rehab Sciences at McMaster, and an adjunct scientist at the Institute for Work and Health. And as a aside to that, both have been very meaningful mentors in my life and career. So it's exciting to get to introduce them and hear from them today or learn from them today. And the title of their talk is Building Employer Capacity for Disability Inclusion Through Knowledge to Practice. And I'll turn it to both of you now.
Thank you so much. I'm going to get started. Emile and I will build off of each other a little bit here. And we're really excited to be here today and share our work with you. Just going on to the next slide. We want to start with a land acknowledgement. So where we are currently meeting, or where IDEA is situated, the national office, has for thousands of years been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this land is still home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to conduct our work on this land. So this acknowledgement is relevant to the Toronto area, and we are coming together today virtually. So we know that many of you are joining us from other locations across Turtle Island and perhaps beyond. So we suggest that you take a moment to think about the communities in your respective locations. Going to the next slide, just to give you an overview of what we have planned for today with some tentative time allotted. We've already done this introduction to the webinar series, and we're a few minutes ahead of time. We are going to provide a very brief overview of IDEA, acknowledging that many of you who are joining us today might have already seen an overview of IDEA or be familiar with it from other opportunities over the past 6 months or so. So we're going to do this really briefly for those of you who are joining us for the first time. And then we're going to spend more time discussing projects in our Hub 1 and Hub 2 that both Emile and I are respectively leading. And we'll give you an idea of some of the projects underway and the deliverables that we're hoping to produce, and how you might be able to engage with us on some of these projects. And then what we will do is have more time for some Q&A. So we remind you again that the Q&A is open at the bottom of your screen, and that's a great way to post some questions as we go. And you can ask the questions as we go, and we'll have some dedicated time at the end for that. So going on to the next slide, I'm going to turn things over to Emile.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. So in the next few slides, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of IDEA for those of you who are new to hearing about us. So IDEA, we describe it as a knowledge to practice social innovation laboratory. We're funded through an initiative at the federal level called New Frontiers in Research Fund. It's the transformation stream. It's a funding envelope we've received for 6 years. And what we are focused on is advancing the skills and capacities of workplace stakeholders in the area of inclusive employment. Sometimes we describe it as demand-side capacity building, really building up the capacity of employers to be inclusive of the diversity of talent that's out there. We're what we describe as a transdisciplinary, partner-driven, and solution-focused initiative. And what we do is we develop evidence-informed products that support inclusive workplaces. And most of our work we base on existing knowledge bases, and including sometimes initiatives that are already in place in different workplaces, which we try to identify and evaluate and see how we can scale them up. So we really want to start off with the knowledge base that's already available to us through various sources rather than reinventing the wheel. And I actually will go through our methodology in a little bit more detail in a subsequent slide. So just a bit about our kind of philosophy, our values, our mission, our vision. This is something that's taken from our website, www.vreidea.ca. So our mission is to help create stronger and more diverse labor markets that include persons with disabilities through evidence-informed policy and practice. And our vision is to see every workplace in Canada have the capacity to recruit, hire, onboard, retain, mentor, and promote persons with disabilities across the full range of employment opportunities. And because we really value inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility in all areas of society, particularly in the labor market. And we value strong and diverse labor markets where all persons have equal opportunities in careers, jobs, and work. In this slide, I have a diagram of how we're structured. We're structured around hubs. I think Rebecca used that word already. There's 3 core hubs, and then we have a couple of hubs we describe as cross-cutting hubs. And I'll give a little bit more detail about that. So this is the diagram of these 5 hubs. I mentioned that we're multidisciplinary, we're multi-sectoral, we're also partner-driven. Each of these hubs has a lead that's an academic and a partner lead as well. And these hubs, we describe them sometimes as incubator hubs, are entry points for research and inquiry. They're not standalone activities. We really work together, and all of the subject matter that we're starting our foundation work with is really connected. So we meet quite regularly as an initiative to make sure we're cross-fertilizing some of the work that we're doing. Really helps informs other projects that are happening within the initiative. So it's really important that we're connected together. The first hub, which is one that I lead with Don Galland, is called Workplace Systems and Partnerships. It's really focused on all of the activities that are happening within the organization and all the stakeholders in the workplace setting. Hub 2 is Employment Support Systems. It's being led by Rebecca Gewurtz and Francis Fung from March of Dimes. And it really looks at the things around the workplace that are important to be in place, all those wraparound supports, because a lot of times work just isn't feasible unless all of the other things in a person's life are in place. We really like to focus on the whole person. You know, work can only work if you have housing security and income security and food security, and there's other things you need to, like transportation, that needs to be available for people to be able to think about work, as well as other kinds of services that help support the person who's looking or engaged in work. Hub 3 is looking at transitions to work and career development. That's being led by Dan Samosh, our host of this speaker series, as well as Arif Jessa and Sinead McCarthy, who is from Youth Employment Services, or YES. So they're really looking at people coming into the labor market from various places. Sometimes it's school to work, but sometimes it's from just not being in the labor market for whatever reason. And then the 2 cross-cutting hubs. Hub 4 is about inclusive environmental design. It's about getting beyond just the built environment. Think about inclusive environmental design permeating all facets of our human systems, right? And that's being led by Mahadio Sukai from CNIB and Jordana Mizell from SUNY Buffalo. And then our last hub that's also cross-cutting is called Disruptive Technologies and the Future of Work. As we all know, technology is changing very rapidly, and it can be very disruptive, but we want to harness that technology so that it helps advance the issues that are really important to us as a society. And that hub is being led by a couple of our colleagues from OCAD University, Yuta Treviranus and Angelica Cischaperis. So that's the hub structure that we're operating by. Our next slide, I'm giving you a little bit more detail in this slide about our methodology. There's a diagram here with 5 steps. We call it actually our 5-step signature methodology. It's about how we go from knowledge to practice, right? So at the front end, we start off with a very deliberative process to identify priority areas. A lot of this work at the front end is being done by our partners and our stakeholders. Us as academics, we bring our toolkit of expertise on how to, get really solid, well-grounded knowledge and evidence bases. But the partners and the people working in this space know what's really urgently needing to be addressed. Where are those gaps? Where is there work to be done? So we work with them to help identify that. We start off with rapid syntheses. As I mentioned, we work from existing knowledge bases, whether it's a peer-reviewed literature base or gray literature, or just field knowledge, talking to key informants in the field who are working in this space on a regular basis and have a good handle on what's working well, what's not working well, where there's still gaps. The next step is then having stakeholder consultations to get some sense of the experiences that they're having and mapping that out to identify where the challenges are. Doing some solution generation and prototyping through co-design methods, working with our partners. That's step 3. 4 is implementing, evaluating solutions at the local level. We want to make sure they're working, try to identify the variables that make it work well or not work well, and why, tweak it to get it working just right. And then we think about scaling. That's step 5, scaling those local innovations with ongoing evaluation in the field. So we really want to get solutions out there across a sector, across Canada, across the labor market, because our ultimate goal is to have high impact and transformative change in the employment of persons with disabilities. And throughout this process, measurement and evaluation is absolutely critical. So target setting and to ensure we're reaching our impacts that we are looking to achieve, and measuring, evaluating all along the way. And this is sometimes an iterative process. We might have to go back to an earlier step if we find there's still some challenges that we haven't quite figured out. So, but it's not necessarily meant to be linear, but it gives you a good representation of how we go through from the knowledge development phase right through the practice and uptake and scaling phases. In this slide, I have a list of our partners. The print is really fine. I'm sorry if it's not very visible from your end. We have quite a number of partners, from research, from the disability community, from labor organizations, industry, service providers, and government. This is the list of folks who joined us when we first put together this grant and received funding. We're having new partners join us all the time. It's a space that's really growing, and people are excited about making change, and we're excited that people are really keen to see change happening. So we are looking to partner with folks. This can only work if we all work together. So I think partnerships is the way to go to make it, substantive change. We have to work together for that. And so we encourage anybody who's interested in working with us in this space to reach out to us. Here's a slide with the logos of our various partners, which we'll have to add to, but we're just really excited to be working with all these great organizations. Okay, so in the next few slides, I'm going to drill down on Hub 1 projects, the workplace systems and partnerships. As I mentioned, I'm co-leading that with my colleague Dom Gallant from Ready, Willing, and Able. I have listed here 4 projects. I'm going to give a bit more detail about the first 2. So the first project is Best Practices for Accessibility Planning and Reporting. Many of you may know that's a requirement under the Accessible Canada Act, and also a requirement under some provincial level jurisdictions as well. But we're framing the notion of best practices for accessibility planning and reporting as something all organizations should do, and not just to meet the minimum requirements of the law and their obligations, but to do it in a very intentional, proactive way to make sure they are always thinking about how they can do better. Because it's really important to think about the notion that there's always room for improvement and to go well beyond the minimum requirements of the law. So that's the way we're framing it, as well as thinking about the needs of different kinds of organizations. Maybe small organizations need a different set of best practice guidance that are more digestible for small operations versus larger operations. So we're really thinking about the needs of different organizations in different sectors and different parts of the economy. The second project I want to detail a bit more is the Ontario Federation of Labor's Inclusive Design for Employment workshop that we're partnering with them to develop and deliver. Another project, which I'm not going to talk about, but I just putting it out here on the table to let you know what we're doing. We're doing a scan of promising practices in industry. Again, this is drawing on our notion that there's lots of great things happening out there that we may not know about. So we're speaking to folks in industry to get a sense of what they're doing, maybe at a small scale that they feel is really working well. Identify what those practices are. Figure out what makes it work well or not work well in a particular context, and see what we can borrow and generalize to a broader context and share it with all folks in this space across Canada if possible. The last one I have here is about taking a disability lens in the procurement and supply chain. We feel that for organizations to be inclusive, they need to think about all aspects of their organizational activities, not just HR type practices. So we think about, taking that disability lens in all organizational activities, including the supply chain, because the supply chain for large organizations in particular might cut across a number of organizations who are employing folks as well. And unless everybody follows suit and looks to be inclusive of that diversity of talent, it's just not going to work. So really, we need to think beyond just the immediate boundaries of your workplace and the folks that you employ, to think about the supply chain and how you as an actor in the system can influence that supply chain. Okay, so I'm going to drill down, as I mentioned, on best practices for accessibility planning and reporting. A key concept in this domain is about disability confidence. Some of you may have heard of this term. It's a really important term to kind of digest and think about how we can measure it well. It describes the confidence that workplace parties, employers, unions, and others in the workplace have in their capacity to fully include persons with disabilities in the workplace. So that confidence that they have in being able to do that. A disability confident workplace really puts policies into practice to ensure persons with disabilities are included, that they belong, and they do not have barriers to employment or promotion within that workplace. In this slide, I have a diagram of a conceptual kind of map of what disability confidence is about. It's from one of our colleagues from Blue Review. Lindsay, Sally Lindsay is her name, is the lead author of this piece. She's done some really great work in this space to deconstruct kind of what that disability confidence idea is about and how organizations grow in this space. So she's developed this 4-step kind of maturity kind of approach to disability confidence, where maybe at the front end, an organization that's new to this idea is feeling a bit uncomfortable with what exactly does it mean to address disability in the workplace. So it may be because they have some kind of stigma or discomfort about lack of knowledge. Maybe they're uncomfortable around people with disabilities because they don't know how to communicate with them, and they have preconceived ideas about what persons with disabilities are capable of doing or not capable of doing. They may move on then to a bit more comfort, involving disability awareness training to improve workplace culture and change people's mindsets. So they're making headway in that space. They're sharing lived experiences to help break down some of that stereotypes that we may have in those areas that we don't really understand well. So you can also try to make the business case for retaining persons with disabilities, because they can be innovative, that they're really great problem solvers, they have really strong work ethics. We kind of realize there's talent there to be tapped into. You might then move on to broadening your perspective. So you challenge you challenge stigma and stereotypes across the board. You try to minimize bias and really focus on people's abilities and their talents. You really value their talent. You're not focusing on the nature of their condition. You were starting to realize that disability is a social construction, and we construct the environment and we can construct it differently, and it's in our power to do that. And lastly, you can think about a disability confident organization that's supportive and inclusive of workplace culture. And then organizations really trying to lead social change. So go beyond their parameters of their workplace and think about how they can be leaders in the field, building employment tools that display support and display and support skills development. So that's kind of the construct of going from that starting point where you're not familiar with this to really being a leader and spearheading it in your sector amongst your peers. So just going on with some key concepts, and on a parallel construct that we see in the literature, this is coming from a literature review we did, is the notion of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. And some folks in the US in particular have done some work in the idea of this diversity and maturity in that diversity of EDIA. So thinking on beyond just disability, but all of the diversity that we see in the labor market, people's social locations, people's identities are defined by much more than just their disability status. And lots of people get marginalized for a variety of reasons. When I think about how do we tap into that talent pool, regardless of what their social location is. So it's a concept like diversity, but it includes a broader notion of that diversity. They've created a 5-stage model where they start off with just being aware of the issue, then you're starting to be compliant with legislative obligations, then you're getting more tactical and strategic. You're starting to integrate it in the 4th step where it's part of how you work, and then the 5th step is being sustainable, that you're continually thinking about how you can tap into the talent of diversity that's out there in the labor market. So EDIA maturity may vary in different aspects of your organization and its different areas of activity. So you might think about EDIA maturity in human resources as a starting point. I mentioned procurement, the work we're doing in procurement. You can think about EDIA maturity in procurement or communications or technology use, maybe with clients and customers and community relations as well. Another construct really important to moving forward in accessibility planning and reporting, the notion of continual improvement. So this is a process of enhancing the system to achieve ongoing improvements in targeted areas of activity and desired outcomes. I have a diagram here that has 4 parts to it. It's framed around this concept that's a concept of continuum improvement called Plan, Do, Check, Act, or PDCA. It's the foundations of a lot of workplace systems guidance, and we're using this to develop some guidance around accessibility planning and reporting. At the front end, you do some planning, you determine what you will do in a particular cycle and how you will achieve some targets that you've set for yourself, maybe develop a team to work on achieving those targets. The do part is implementing your plan, and checking is that measurement and evaluation, making sure you're making progress, achieving your targets, and then acting on it, to take appropriate action when if there are corrections needed to be done as you're moving forward, making sure you're going on the right path, expanding, reaching your targets. Once you reach them, you'll have another cycle. So there's always room for improvement. So that brings us to another concept that's really important to organizational processes in this place. It's called systems thinking. Really, we like to think about a lot of our work being integrated into the system to create a new normal in those systems. So system thinking is a way of making sense of the complexity of the world by looking at it in terms of the whole and relationships between different parts of that whole. It's used to explore and develop effective actions in complex contexts, enabling systems change, right? So workplace systems and partnerships, we call our hub. Systems thinking is really holistic, a way to investigate factors, interactions that could contribute to possible outcomes. So systems thinking is really comprehensive approach to introducing organizational change and development to create a new normal at the systems level. And that's what we're looking to do, is create a new normal in the labor market, within workplaces, in the broader labor market, in society as a whole. And that when we combine those concepts of systems thinking and continual improvement, I have this diagram here that helps represent sort of that process as it evolves in the continual improvement within an organization. The diagram at the top, as you can see, has policies. So policies really play a fundamental role in setting clear directions for organizations to follow. You start off with developing some policies, you document those policies, you articulate them, and then you have to put them into action. So the next part of that diagram is organizing. So organizing structures, organizational structures need to be put in place to deliver on those policies. Policies are great, but you need to take it to that next stage and really put in those structures for delivery of policies. Next is planning and implementing. So that's the next part of the diagram. It requires a planned and systematic approach to implement those policies and deliver on them. Following that is measuring performance. So emphasis is given to measurement of performance against the targets that you've set to identify areas that you need to improve. Really, measurement and evaluation is critical. We need to know and have evidence that we're making progress. And the last is about reviewing and learning from those experiences, which is fundamental to that continual improvement process. You reflect on the path you've taken in this particular cycle. Once you've achieved your goals, what made it work well, what didn't work so well, and how you can do better in the next cycle. And then you go through that cycle again, setting some new targets. As I said, there's always room for improvement. Even the most advanced organizations in the space are continually thinking about how can we do better. And the environment changes a lot as well. So you often have to respond to environmental changes and think about how we adapt to changing technologies, making sure those technologies are harnessed in the best way possible. And so here I have a 5-step framework for action that we've developed and will detail in our best practice guidance. So at the front end, you identify core areas that need to be addressed. Obviously at the front end, you want to think about compliance requirements and making sure you're compliant with the minimum standards of the law. And the second step, you want to include other areas of strategic importance for the organization. So really getting tactical, so going beyond the minimum requirements of the law. The third step is about creating mixed teams of workplace actors to address each of the areas. You complete scans and audits to see where you're at and where there's gaps. You want to develop that action plan with both short and longer term targets, implement those plans, and ensure there's an open reporting to really make sure we're reaching those targets. The fourth step then is to plan for an EDIA lens in all areas of the organizations, in all areas of the activities within that organization, really integrate into the way you do business, essentially. And then 5, you institutionalize that notion of continual improvement in the planning process across all areas of the organization. That's when you're really sustainable, when it's woven into how the organization operates on a daily basis and the way the organization thinks. They're always taking into consideration disability and diversity and all the DIA kind of components across all facets of the organization. Next, I'm going to talk just a little bit in a couple of slides here before I pass it on to Rebecca about another project. As I mentioned, the Inclusive Design Workshop that we're developing in partnership with the Ontario Federation of Labour. The objective of this workshop is to develop and deliver a customized workshop on inclusive design, really focusing on creating more accessible, inclusive workplaces. And we really feel our partners, Ontario Federation of Labour, is a great avenue by which we can get everybody up to speed in this area. It's going to be a train the trainer approach that we're taking. We'll be developing the foundational tools and resources for these workshops, and then we're going to pass it on to the Ontario Federation of Labour to take it to their constituents. The target audience at the front end is labor leaders and activists, but ultimately we think it would be a really great workshop to have available for employers, including senior management, supervisors and managers, and human resource specialists as well. This is something that everybody should be up to speed on. Ideally, these would be joint union management sessions that are people participating in these workshops so they can have a dialogue about how to implement the learnings that they get from the workshop. In this slide, I just have a couple of or 3 key concepts. Something we used to talk a lot about was universal design. It's an older terminology where we thought the one size fits all kind of notion, but we realized that maybe one size doesn't fit all. Oftentimes one size only fits one person. The conversation has moved over to accessibility and accommodation and inclusion, and that's really critical to think about. But ultimately, where we want to get to is inclusive design or inclusive by design, where organizations, systems, labor market, society more broadly is inclusive by design, so that we don't need to think about one-off retrofitting all the time or addressing needs as they arise, putting out fires as they arise, kind of thing, so that the design of systems at the front end are inclusive from the get-go, and there'll be minimal tweaking that needed on a case-by-case basis. Invariably, you sometimes have to do that, but we want to minimize that so that we think about the diversity of people in the labor market when we create organizations, when we create systems, when we create whatever wraparound supports are available for people engaged in the labor market or of working age. And this is my last slide. It's the modules that we're considering putting into this workshop. There's a lot of them. There's 10 of them listed here. I won't go through them all. So clearly there'll be some opportunity to pick and choose from this menu. Some workshops may be focusing on certain aspects of the notion of inclusive design. Others will cater to maybe different needs depending on where the constituency that's attending the workshop, where they're at in terms of their training needs. But we brought this menu option forward, and we'll be developing modules across all these 10 items, and then hopefully that'll serve the needs of our partners, the Ontario Federation of Labour, going forward for a few years. We'll do our own measurement and evaluation of this workshop in pilots, and hopefully we'll try to keep a pulse on how it's advancing through the trainer dissemination methodology that we'll be employing to get this workshop out into the field. I think now I'm going to pass it on to Rebecca. Take it away.
Thank you, Emile. There's so much exciting stuff going on, and you know, it's really exciting to see things progress, and there'll be so many amazing outcomes and deliverables, but from all the work that's happening in all the hubs, but specifically Hub 1. So I'll give a brief overview of Hub 2. Please keep the questions coming, and we will spend time on the questions and discussion in just a few minutes. In Hub 2, our focus is on employment support systems, and some people on the line today might be part of employment supports. We are working really closely with the organizations that deliver employment supports for people with disabilities across Canada. Specifically, Hub 2 is being co-led by Frances Fung from March of Dimes. And, you know, everything we're doing within this hub is definitely being done in collaboration with Frances and others in the employment support systems. So what we want to do in this hub is really look at how employment support systems can currently are working with employers to build their capacity, and if we can evaluate and scale up some of the innovations in the field, and create resources, because there's so many great innovations happening in this space. We want to make sure that it's being used across the system. We are doing some other things and some very specific examinations in this space. So I'll give you an overview and then give you some preliminary findings from some of our scans to date. One of the things we want to do is look at best practices in the use of remote work as an accommodation. That's a project we've been working on for a while now, and I'll be able to provide some findings on that project. We are also looking at through both an environmental scan and a scoping review to identify and evaluate approaches to employment supports that target the needs of employers and what employers need to create inclusive workplaces. So, and we're trying to evaluate some of the wraparound supports that people need to be successful at work, as well as exploring intersecting issues of disability, gender, and race within employment support services. So I'll going to the next slide, I'll drill down a little bit in some of these areas. So currently we have underway a scoping review and environmental scan of existing literature, as well as existing practices for building employer capacity. So traditionally, employment support services have really worked, really targeted their services to working with the disabled job seeker or employee, and but we know that many employment support services, in order to do their work, have developed some really innovative practices around working more directly with employers, and we really want to capture the work that's happening in this space. The other thing we are doing is I currently have a graduate student, Gewurtz, who's on the line today, who will be sharing more about this at the DWC conference next week, but is looking more specifically at disabled job candidates from racialized groups and their experiences with employment support services, as well as the work service providers are doing to better support these intersectional issues. And then we are working closely with service providers in this area to identify and evaluate their existing innovations, and to showcase effective models that might work with particular populations. So we want to examine some of the kind of creative solutions that employment support service providers have developed to skill up employers in specific areas and try to showcase some of that. So going to the next slide, this is just to showcase some of the findings that we've been doing. So for the remote work scan, you can see that we undertook a very comprehensive literature and great peer review and gray literature scan, and identified articles to review. So that those findings will be shared very, very soon. But just to show you like the amount of work we've been doing, we have a little army of students who have been supporting this work and working closely with a librarian to do a search. And this is remote work specifically for people with disabilities. So we know that this has been a trend in this space over time, but especially since the pandemic. So more to come on that, and that will be reported and shared on our website in the coming months. And going to the next slide here, I can share some initial findings. I was debating which project to report some initial findings from, knowing that Ecom is going to be sharing at the DWC conference. I thought I'd share some initial findings from the remote work project. And what we found overall in this literature is that there's very little literature or gray literature in the Canadian context. That there are very few studies about remote work for people with disabilities, much more gray literature. Within the literature that does exist, there's very little depth of exploration around intersectional identities, and very little that really teases out some of the challenges for particular job sectors. Around remote work for people with disabilities, there's a range of terminology and a range of arrangements that are being utilized in the workplace. But generally, remote work is framed in the literature as a positive, as a helpful accommodation, with a few exceptions around some of the challenges, the technological challenges or need for adaptive equipment in the home space. So the next step for that project, going to the next slide, is that we're going to be launching some more, so that those findings are reported based on the literature. And in the coming month or so, we're going to be launching more outreach to the community through an online survey and key informant consultations to really understand the impact of remote work on the experiences of people with disabilities in the workplace and the experiences of workplace stakeholders. So again, going to the next slide here, what can you expect from Hub 2? We will be sharing summaries of existing supports for employers and for employment support service providers, and a summary of the existing evidence. We're going to be working closely with service providers to co-design recommendations for both service providers and policy decision makers or funders. We're going to be showcasing different models of how to build capacity within employment supports and guidance documents, which by this we mean plain language summary with recommendations. And we anticipate creating policy briefs on how we can better support employers to hire and accommodate people with disabilities. So that is what you can expect from Hub 1 and Hub 2 in the coming months and years, as we work through this work. I mean, more will come in, I would say, the coming months, actually, just to give you a sense. And this will all be, all of our work will be available through the website. We really do want to stay in touch with people. So in addition to the webinar series, you can always reach out to us on our current landing page and future more developed website that will be launched quite soon. So that's what we've prepared to share with you guys today. We welcome some questions, and there was already a few questions last time I looked. So I'll leave, yeah.
I just want to mention, because you mentioned the DWC conference, the Disability and Working in Canada conference. I'll just do a shout out about it happening next week on the 29th and 30th in Ottawa. Something we've been doing with a number of our partners in the disability community for a number of years. If you're not able to get to Ottawa, there is a streaming option. You can attend virtually, or particularly the plenary session will be live streamed, so that you can access it remotely. So that's the 29th and 30th next week, Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah, program is available already on the website. There's some really exciting sessions. So I hope many people can make it there.
Yeah. Dan,
Uh,
questions?
yeah, we've got some questions. So first off, though, thank you to our presenters for kicking us off for our first webinar. I want to first off just acknowledge we are again going to be posting the webinar online, and we'll also share slides. I'm noticing from some of the chat, I think perhaps in the future too, we can send the slides earlier if presenters are okay with that, so that people have access. And just thank you to Vicky and an anonymous attendee as well for mentioning this, and some standards as well. And we'll follow up with you on that. Our first question comes from Fatim, who wrote, "Hi, sorry, maybe I missed. Could you explain idea work in the area of research? Thank you."
Cool. You guys, I'll start maybe, and then Rebecca, you can add to it because there's lots we can say. So we are, I mentioned a social innovation laboratory, really focusing on knowledge to practice. So at the front end, that knowledge is, the research, I guess, that we're doing to gather that knowledge or develop new knowledge and put it into practice. And then even taking it further is helping scale it across the sector. So we also try to do capacity building and how to do research in this space, in the work disability policy arena, and doing applied research, and doing it in the way we do it, that's partner driven as well, because that's not always the norm in a lot of academic research circles. So we're trying to build that capacity for new researchers, new academics coming into this space to take the methodology that we use and make it part of the way they do their work. So we're really looking to recruit all the time new researchers, particularly persons with lived experience, to help us with our work. But our research is multi or transdisciplinary, so it comes from different disciplines, from all three of the key science areas: social science, health science, and natural science. So it's actually a tri-council, they call it. So our research is quite broad in terms of the areas that their skill sets that it covers, because this policy is very complex, and requires that knowledge coming from different lenses to build into the understanding of the best way forward. Rebecca, you might want to add something to that.
I'm not sure there's too much more to add. I mean, this is a research initiative, so everything we do will, like Emile and I are researchers, so everything we're doing will come from a research perspective and building our capacity to do multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral research in this area. So, yeah, so I think all our products everything that we put out will be evidence-based or based on the best available evidence. And some of the work that we're doing that's really around, scaling and sharing existing practices is really going to come from an evaluative perspective, meaning we'll do an evaluation as we share that work, and so we hope that people understand that the work that we'll be sharing, we're not just a vehicle for sharing and information, but rather there'll be an evaluation before that's done.
Yeah. Can I just add a few things? Okay, so I just want to really emphasize, we were strong believers in knowledge to practice or evidence-informed policy decision making, so that there's a knowledge base that goes into better understanding the way forward. And because we're academics, the people who have our toolkit of expertise working with our partners, our knowledge, we want to make it available to everybody. So we do peer review. We will post things on our website. It'll be all open access. It's really meant to get the word out of what we're learning together with our partners to help advance the work in this space, whether it's within Canada and also beyond as well. So building up that knowledge base for the benefit of all of society is absolutely critical for us, and making it available to everyone who will gain from the knowledge that we're developing with our partners is really critical. So we are trying to get the word out, through various means. Our key platform for our partners will be our website, but certainly peer review is part of the academic way to get things out to all our colleagues, both nationally and internationally.
I just want to acknowledge as well, we have a lot of questions and only so much time.
Okay.
So we're probably not going to be able to get to everything. So if we don't get to your question, please send an email, and please also don't take it personally. We just only have so much of a compressed time together. But the next question for you is from Peter, and it reads, why does the methodology step 1 not start with defining problems and how many people are impacted?
I can start, but each of the hubs has different areas of entry point for their research. I think I would say yes, it does, because our first area of work with our partners identifying priority areas based on gaps and challenges that our partners have identified as being really important to address. So it is trying to figure out where's the best use of our time at the front end that we can work to solve and get past and understand how to move the needle forward, and because there's lots to be done and we can't do it all, so that's particularly not all at one time. So I think we need to prioritize, and our partners really help. That 5-step methodology at the front end was that working with our partners, a deliberative process to intentionally identify what are the priority gaps and challenges that we need to address. Sometimes that's identified through the lived experiences of our partners working in this policy arena. Sometimes it also can be validated with data when we look at statistics from, wherever it's from, CSD, Canadian Survey of Disability, we can see where there's key gaps, what sectors, seem to not be employing a lot of persons with disabilities, what the lived experiences are of certain subsets of the population that we're targeting, to understand what their challenges are. So it really has to start there with where the needs are. And I think we do work that way.
Yeah, and in some cases, we're building off of past work. So in many cases, problem definition has been done in past work. So we don't want to repeat that work. We want to build on it. So it depends, as Emile said, in the space and what exists and where we're starting from.
Great. And another question here that I think also has a broader question attached to it is around if there is any connection with the Ability Expo. And I think maybe a question to add to it is, how can potential partners get engaged with IDEA?
You want to start, Rebecca?
Well, I don't know the specific answer because I don't think I have personally connected with Ability Expo, but I don't want to speak for you, Emile. But what I can say about the second part of that question around connecting with us is, please reach out. We are working, we want to connect broadly and connect people to the right hub that is operating. So send us an email or reach out through our website when it's up and fully running. And we'd love to connect to people and hear the kinds of things that you're doing in this space and potentially collaborate when appropriate. But I'll turn it to you, Emile.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're doing that shout out. Yeah, do connect with us. We're easy to find. Well, we have our website listed here. If you Google either of our names, Rebecca Gewurtz or Emile Tompa or Dan Samosh or any of our other key partners, you'll find us quite readily. So do reach out. That's really exciting for people who want to join on and be part of this process and work with us to make change. Really, we have to, as I mentioned, work together to make change. The Abilities Expo, I've heard of it. We've not directly been involved in it just yet, but I'm glad you're pointing it out. Whenever we hear about these things, we actually have a list of these various opportunities to speak to the audience that we're trying to reach out to present what we're doing in different venues, kind of thing. So we'll put that on our list and think about how we can engage with the folks that attend the Abilities Expo. And great to see all of these forums, are happening throughout the year across the country, kind of thing, because we want to be there if we can and get connected with whoever's attending those venues.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge too, we have an attendee who wants to ask a question anonymously. I think right now in the moment, I'm not quite sure how to do that within the session, but we're going to work towards perhaps in the future a more streamlined way of doing that.
Sure.
You send any one of us an email involved in the presentation here, and we'll make sure that we get to your question, probably just after the session. I think possibly our last question, just because of the time we have, comes from Sue and reads, can an employer be disability confident but not meet minimum legislative requirements for accommodation and accessibility? And then they added a quotation, you don't know what you don't know.
Okay, so good question. The way I define that construct, it is a construct that we need to kind of put some words around, ideas around it, kind of thing. I think of it as a point where you feel you're very familiar with the space and what you need to do to be a good actor in that space. So that you're confident that you can find the solutions. Even if you don't have all of them yourself, no one person or one organization is going to have all the answers. They need to reach out and get support, but they're confident that there are solutions out there. There's a lot of services out there that will provide guidance, so you know that that guidance will be available to you, and you're comfortable with that process of finding those solutions, sort of thing. So it's not that you have all the answers, but you're comfortable. So if you, for some reason, are conscious of the need to be compliant with the legislation, but you want to double check, there's some great guidance on about the Accessible Canada Act and accessibility planning and reporting that's available currently on the federal government's websites to give you some guidance. And somebody who's disability confident knows that they can find that guidance and the help that they need to become compliant. So it's not necessarily meant to be a term that means by necessity you're compliant, but certainly it's somebody who's working that space, that's familiar with where to find the solutions, and it doesn't kind of shy away from it. It doesn't have preconceived ideas and stigma about the talent pool that's out there, and so knows that they can find the way forward readily enough. And so I'm not sure if it's synonymous with disability confidence and compliance, but certainly it's a starting point to get you down to that path, and hopefully beyond too, because a confident organization doesn't just do the minimum requirements of the law, but realizes the win-win by being leaders in this space, and the talent pool that's out there to tap into. And I hear about labor shortages all the time. Lots of organizations are struggling to tap into talent pools to fill positions, and yet this group of in the labor market, persons with disabilities are hugely untapped talent pools. So disability confident organization knows that there's an opportunity there and will act on it.
And Rebecca, did you want to add anything?
I wasn't 100. No, I think what Emile has said is probably as comprehensive as I could say. So thank you, Emile, for that.
Great. Well, we're just wrapping up now. We're very close to 1 p.m. So I think now is a good time to thank the presenters, and as well the team who has helped make sure this is possible, who has coordinated all of this, particularly thinking of Aiken Grewal, Therese Salanix, Sabrina Chaudhry, and both Emile and Rebecca for being here today and also helping to coordinate things.
Very good, yeah.
I want to note we do have a next webinar. It'll be January 26th. Stay tuned for more information on the IDEA website and also through our newsletter as well. And please do remember, after this webinar, a survey will pop up. If you can fill it out about accessibility or anything else, we would really, really appreciate your feedback. So yeah, thank you everyone for sharing some of your Friday with us, and have a nice weekend.